think, as you said, you said it so many times, the world trusted the US because they had the rule of law, and they broke that during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And they've shown, even recently, Trump, he goes into hysterical tweets and stuff like that. India was, in fact, when I visit India, people are like, I'm talking to some high net worth people, and they think we were going the American side, because obviously I believe they're going into World War III. It has already begun. It's just sides that need to be taken. And I was thinking India might go the Western way. And recently with Trump's tweets, it seems he's even pushed them in the China-Russia corner. What are your views on how does this play out, especially given you're in Europe? Because I think Europe seems to be getting itself into trouble trying to back Ukraine. And I think they're trying to do that because they need to default on their debt. And war will be used as a convenient excuse to blame the boogeyman. Do you want to talk around that?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions, and I want to be sensitive. There's going to be people I'm neither left nor right at this point.
Me neither.
I'm a classic libertarian. And I'm not pro-Trump or anti-Trump. I was never pro-Biden or anti-Biden. I was just pro-free market capitalism, pro-honesty, pro-candor, pro-direct reality, pro-facts. That may seem like a cop-out. I can think of a lot of ways to critique America, and I always start by, I'm an American. For God's sakes, I have a massive bias towards America. I still think it's an extraordinary country, an extraordinary history, and extraordinary potential. And I'm when you say, what will America do? You have to also say, well, what will Trump do? They're not the same thing. Just like, Keir Starmer, the Macron is not France, and Keir is not the UK, and Trump isn't all America. He's many, but even those who are pro-Trump have kind of taken a step back. So you can't just say, what will America do? What will Trump do? It's such a nuanced question. What will Biden do? What will Obama do? First of all, to me, whoever's in the White House, it's not really the leader. There's so much other powers. That's a whole other rabbit hole. Who really makes
Let's go there, Matthew. Let's go
America.
there, because I believe these guys are just...
It's not just an APAC.
These guys are just puppets. They're just the front.
They're happy idiots. They're the placeholders. They're literally elected. What Trump was a threat was because he wasn't your typical happy idiot. He wasn't your typical puppet. He wasn't your typical malleable person, but it clearly is malleable. There is still leverage on him. And this is the stuff that Woodrow Wilson was afraid of in 1913, that he has said you had to whisper under your breath, this deep state. That's another rabbit hole. But the point is it the cabinet? Is it the Pentagon? Is it the NRC, these committees of billionaires who determine who the next king will be, Republican or Democrat? Is it the lobbying on K Street that basically bribes presidents and congressmen and senators? Is it foreign influence? You could spend a great deal of time pulling your hair out on each of those things, but what it to me suggests is not just the president. But we do have a president. He does have immense powers. He does have immense power behind him and influencers behind him. You could argue dual nationals. You could argue big banks. You could argue whatever string you want to pull. There are other things helping him make his decisions. In terms of what I see as a European or European American, there's a lot of things I could speak about. There's a great quote by Henry Kissinger that said, to be an enemy of America, well, that's dangerous. But to be a friend of America, that's fatal, because America will only do what America wants for itself. The America of the Marshall Plan post World War II, or the America of trying to help Germany and Japan rebuild itself. That was an extraordinary little moment of cooperation, and you could say purely generous altruism. But they did want to make sure that Japan and Germany never created another Hitler or never created another demagogue. And the best way to avoid another Hitler was to avoid another Versailles, to stop punishing other people and start building them up. That was a generous moment, you could say, in world history. But for the most part, to Kissinger's point, countries have only self-interest. They don't have friends or enemies, just self-interest. When America basically pushed the European countries to support it in every foreign policy and in NATO, and said, you got to punish Russia. And by the way, Germany is burning coal during the embargo. Somehow Nord Stream pipeline Epsteined itself mysteriously. We all know how that happened. But we have these lies that we say, but our allies in Germany, and I spent a lot of time in Germany, are burning coal. They're putting up windmills. Look, I live in the south of France. There's a big difference in the south of France and Frankfurt when it comes to sunshine. I don't think windmills are going to do it in Germany. But they're following U.S. policy in the middle, in the world, in the East, in the Ukraine. They're literally trying to buy oil from Russia while they're forced to sell arms and give support to Zelensky in the Ukraine. I mean, it's crazy. It's schizophrenic. And again, you could spend a lot of time on this. And they're supporting America and its foreign policy, and yet now America is imposing tariffs and saying this is. So there's a million reasons why there's a schizophrenia between Europe and America now. Is it Europe and America, or is it Europe and Trump? Is it von der Leyen in Europe? So it's all nuance. But I will say there is a growing, to answer your question, there is a growing sense of we've been duped for so long in following America, and maybe now we need to think differently. That is clear at the conversation at the bar, the dinner table, the soccer field. What's happening inside the halls of power with Macron or von der Leyen or in the UK, that's a different question. Are they still going to prostitute themselves to the U.S. policy without question or not will be determined. These are many interesting things, but there's no doubt that there has been a break. Trump says, pay for your own security. We've been doing it for forever. Trump blames them on their VAT taxes. We're going to hit you back with tariffs. You can make cases why he's right or he's wrong. What he's not getting is a lot of love and warm hearts. You could say he's getting respect, but Europeans read the press too. I'm an American. I read the press. When the sitting president calls the head of the central bank a loser and an idiot or a moron, even if you think that, and I've called the Fed chairman worse things than that, but I think if I were the president, I'd show a little more decorum. Some people love that about Trump. Others just think this is this is a cowboy. This is a cowboy.
Do you think he's a cowboy, or do you think this is on purpose? Because some people have read his books where he's purposely doing this because he knows he can't fire Powell. Technically, he cannot fire because it's not in part of the Constitution and the law the way it's written. So he's purposely doing this. And then some people say because he's so used to debt and the cost of the debt has become so high. And that is why obviously we'll go there as well with the Stablecoins and the Genius Act and all of that. That's why they paying off the long-term debt and reissuing at the short end. And that is why he's being so vocal, beating up the chairman on his head, because he's not getting what he wants.
Look, Trump is many things, but he didn't get to where he is by being an idiot. Well, you may not like his policies. It's the same you could say about Putin. He's many things, but he's not an idiot. Trump is many things, but he's not entirely stupid. He wasn't just a successful inheritor. He had to survive New York real estate. And he had, Roy Cohn as a friend, and he had a father like his father. Trump sees the world the way he was raised and the way he was brought into it and the way he succeeded in it. And in Trump's mind, he's not, as I said many times, he's not a leader, he's a winner. Everything is a competition. It's a zero-sum game. There are winners and losers. And to win, by the way, you have to have a loser. And to win in New York real estate, you need low interest rates. You need construction loans. You need to roll over debt. And you need low rates. This is common sense to him as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, and certainly as a real estate developer. But whether you're making real estate projects in New York or building chips in California or building tractors in Ohio or Iowa, you need borrowing costs. And if the borrowing costs are lower, that helps you. So you need lower rates. And in his mind, low rates good, high rates bad. Very simple. What he doesn't have is a larger understanding of our debt crisis in terms of what it means for our currency and what it means for our economy. Because if we have too many, if we have low rates and more expansion of credit, we then debase the dollar. If we debase the dollar, we have more inflation risk. But now at $37 trillion in public debt, we can't even fight inflation like Volcker could because we can't raise rates to fight inflation. In fact, raising rates now is an inflationary event because it just means that the cost of, he's trapped, but he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand how just saying I want low rates because it's good has massive ripple effects on the rest of the economy, the currency, and our leverage globally, and our trade partners, and the de-dollarization that's happening on. It's far too second, third derivative thinking for someone like Trump. And I am not a fan of Powell, but I understand Powell. I have to have a little sympathy for the devil for Powell, because Powell, love him or hate him, and I've never written a lot of good things about him. You have to be honest, Powell can't control how much Congress wants to deficit spend. We're looking at a monthly deficit of $300 billion, possibly quarterly borrowing of $1 trillion, which could equal 4 trillion in annual deficits at some point, literally at this spending pattern, which would mean our deficit to GDP would be 13%. In other words, we have growing deficits at 13% and our GDP is at 2 to 4. That's crazy. So that kind of second, third derivative problems and what that means for our currency, our global leverage, our peace and security, and other countries taking advantage of our weaknesses and war, he only just sees low rates, better for business, gets me reelected, short-term solution. That is scary, but that's true of all the mental midgets when it comes to macroeconomics that have come into the White House. I would think someone like Scott Bessent could help him with that, but I'm not sure. And his vice president went to Yale Law School. I'm sure he's a smart guy. Does he understand monetary policy? Does he understand interest rates? Does he see the connection between rates, debt, and global trade? Does he see the connection between that and GDP growth? And that if you build your deficits too high on low rates for short-term gain, like going to a mall for that new pair of shoes you can't afford, eventually it creates much longer-term pain. And even the reshoring of jobs, all these things are connected. He's not seeing that, and no president has.
I think it's getting to that stage where the exponential function has kicked in, and doesn't matter what they do, it's gotten out of debt. In fact, I've heard your partner, Greyerz, mention in one of his reports that doesn't matter who the president is, Republican or Democrat, every 8 years the debt doubles. So regardless of who comes in and what promises they make, nothing's happening. In fact, I think Doge was just a good psyop to make people feel good for the first 90 days, and then everything's been kicked to the side and let's get on with it. But I know debt is not even a real thing, right? And this is why when people like yourselves talk about gold, I get so inspired, because if we can just get the information out there that debt itself is a construct. And I've always wondered, is obviously the governments and the central banks are in cahoots. They're working together because the central bank can monetize the treasuries and the debt. And obviously now it looks like the Federal Reserve is the only one who's going to have to buy treasuries. Why are governments allowing central banks to do this? Why? Trump is smart, as you said. He knows he's paying interest on money that the central bank creates out of thin air, as you call mouse click money, MMT, magic money tree. Why are they letting this happen? Do you think there could be a change? There's some people are talking about gold revaluation, but also maybe gold could be brought back into the monetary system. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, these are massive questions as far as, there are whole books written on it. It's hard to answer it in a few minutes. I mean, the real question is, why was the Fed ever created? Why were central banks ever created? How did these powers come to be? How did these cabals come to be? How did they scare the hell out of presidents and leaders? Because they had financial power, they had lending, they had credit, they paid for wars, they paid for post-wars, and they somehow managed to wiggle their way in to a building. For example, in the United States, the Federal Reserve is on Constitution Ave, right near the Treasury Department, with an eye shot of the White House. But the Federal Reserve isn't federal or a reserve. It's not even constitutional. If you really look at it, it is the biggest open lie hiding in plain sight right there in this most impressive building, which we're now paying a lot of money to remodel. It looks very, very impressive. It looks very governmental, very federal, very safe. Again, it would take hours. And again, it's an absolute disaster. It is an absolute insult to Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, the very first article of our very first key document, the one that the whole world looked up to, is gold and silver. It's right there. I'm not making this up. Our founding fathers, 250 years ago, who had just saw the French Revolution, what was going on with John Law France, England in 1720, when they tried to debase money to pay for debt with money, literally, they called it assignats, other things. It was the same thing. It was QE 1 through 5, British style or French style. The founding fathers, many of whom were flawed, but they weren't stupid, said, first of all, we have to have sound money, whatever that is, gold and silver, Congress, that's it. It didn't say we need a central bank independent coming in and debasing the currency. So the very first thing you have to ask is, how did these banks ever get in there? How did they do this? How do they create debt within a circle between the Treasury Department and the Fed, which really isn't debt? And how do they make that look like it's independent and federal and reserve? But none of these things are true. And by the way, it's not even constitutional. And how did it get signed into law in 1913, right before Christmas, and half the Congress wasn't there? It is a really dark story, but it would take too long to get into. But the first question is, why is it even there? What can we do now? I don't know if we can outlaw the Fed now. That would be a first start, but that would also be a very destabilizing thing. And will we have gold-backed money again? Get back to Article 1, Section 8. It's going to be impossible to do that at these debt levels. Some major crisis has to happen between now and then before we ever go back to a dollar base or gold-backed dollar, because we have way too much debt and not enough gold. We would have to revalue gold at such an astronomical level that I don't think it would be possible. What I think we're going to do is we're going to admit we've got X amount of ounces. You could say 261 million. You could say we have 8,131 tons. We may have more, we might have less. We've got these gold certificates at the Fed on the asset and the liability side of the Fed and Treasury. They're worth $42 circa 1971. But you know what? Why don't we revalue them to market? That'll give us $1 trillion, roughly. If we revalue those certificates to market, that gives us $1 trillion. Well, we both know that's not enough to cover even a year's interest on U.S. debt. So is that really a solution? The next theory, and I am not here to answer whether it will happen or not, the next theory is, well, let's not revalue gold at market. Let's put in a new bid for 10,000 gold or 20,000 gold. Since we have the most gold, theoretically, we'll reset the gold price, we'll reset the gold floor in London, New York, Shanghai, and St. Petersburg. And suddenly you'll wake up one day and your 3,500 ounce gold coin will now be worth 20,000. Again, I'm not saying this will happen. This is one of the theories they're talking about, is a gold revaluation, or Judy Shelton, a gold-backed U.S. Treasury at some point. Whether or not these things happen are each worth an hour's separate discussion, but what the very fact that they're talking about this in Congress, at the White House, at D.C., and in Trump, of a gold revaluation, the very fact that we're even talking about this is a confession that we already are admitting out loud that our dollar isn't really that respected. It isn't really that strong. And there's no way we're going to pay it back with more mouse click money from the Treasury, or from the Fed, because the world has already seen through that lie. They're seeing through that magic trick. They're moving away. We've done the mouse clicking for too long. We've done the debasing for too long. We've done the credit expansion for too long. Now we've got to go to our desperate last option, which is our piggy bank over there that's got these certificates. Let's revalue them. We'll get some quick cash, like a drug addict. Let's get that needle in there quick. It's basically QE using gold instead of a mouse click. Instead of creating money out of thin air, they're monetizing these old gold receipts. They have to blow the dust off them, get them back up there, revalue them to a higher level, and pay off some debt, and put in the TGA, the Treasury General Account, and pay down some debt. And that, even if they revalue gold at 20,000, that would buy us many years of, okay, we bought more time. We'll take our debt to GDP down from 120 to maybe 90%, and that we can now go borrow more. But even if that were to happen, all it does is postpone the fatal consequence of all the drugs. We would still spend more than we take in. We'd still be addicted to debt, and we'd still be addicted to short-term elections. So it would just buy us more time. But the real question, because it could go for hours and I'd never stop, if we revalue gold higher than spot or market price, you have to remember what Kissinger warned about too. Be careful, because maybe Russia and China have more gold than the U.S. So if we value higher, and I really think they do, and that's another hour conversation on why. But if they do, well, then who has more leverage? If he who has the most gold wins, as Trump himself has said, he who has the gold is king. I hope he knows something I don't know. Maybe we have more gold. To say that and then to realize that we don't have the most gold means we're no longer king. And so it's very complicated. But as Kissinger warned, well, if we revalue gold, it's a short-term solution, but then we lose that leverage for our dollar, and we lose that leverage with our power internationally. And I think China and Russia have been playing chess for years while America plays checkers. I think they've been stacking gold off the record for generations. And so when we revalue, they're going to revalue gold too, and they're going to have a heck of a lot more leverage. So again, very if but. And we can only see, but I think gold will be the conversation on gold revaluation is coming for a reason. We're broke, or we're desperate.
And I don't think any country wants to back their currency by gold, regardless of whether it's China or Russia, because it takes away the open checkbook, right? Yeah, why would they? The governments cannot keep their promises. But I think you touched on that, Scott Best, in talking about monetizing the asset side of the balance sheet is just, again, a gimmick. It's just taking it from $42 something cents to the current market price is $1 trillion. They spend it in 90 days. We're back to square one. And if interest rates keep going up, I think the cycle we're going into, and I think they started with COVID, but the Federal Reserve, the Fed funds rate spiked up in, I think it was September 2019. And me being inside the system, I knew they had to create an event to create lots of liquidity in the system, shut down the world, let's create lots of liquidity, get poor people out of jobs. You cannot eat food in a restaurant, but you can go to Amazon or order food at home. That is when the Agenda 2030, I think, started playing out. And a lot of people are waking up now. I think there's tinkering on the sides with the gold, or do you want to talk about the Genius Act and the stablecoins? Because I know my view on this from some people I follow is in the US, they couldn't have a CBDC anyways, because it's not in the Constitution and the Federal Reserve cannot issue a currency directly to the public, whereas Europe's trying that right now, and you're in Europe. So I know the European Commission is talking about October 2025 launch date, which lets them have capital controls. And I think in the US, because they couldn't do that, stable coins is a way for them to not only back end CBDC, but also create a bid for the treasury at the short term. It serves a lot of purposes, doesn't it, for the government? And it's called Genius, when it's anything but genius.
Yeah, well, that's when you know. And again, this isn't just anyone in America or the world should know. When you call a Patriot Act, you know it's not patriotic, and it isn't. It's appalling. As a lawyer, I can say it's appalling. And that shouldn't be left or right. That should be for everyone to understand. Quantitative easing isn't quantitative easing, just like ethnic cleansing isn't really cleansing anything. It's appalling. And so
it's the exact opposite meaning of what they're trying to say.
It's the exact opposite. It's literally, and the Genius Act is anything but genius, and a stable coin is anything but stable. But this is classic, almost tragic comedy. Shakespeare couldn't make this up. But a couple of things you've touched on. First of all, the stable coin is neither stable nor a coin. The stable coin is really, it's hilarious because it's issued because of the Genius Act, this stable coin can be issued by fintech companies and commercial banks. And it's a blockchain asset with Bitcoin-like properties, centralized by fintech and banks with an audited promise of 1 unit equals $1. So if you want an e-dollar and you're in America and you want a stable coin, you go to JP Morgan or you go to Tether or Circle Internet, you give them $1 and they give you a stable coin back promised backed by US Treasuries. Great. You get a unit. What does JP Morgan or Tether or Circle Internet get? They get to then take your dollar that you actually gave them, invest it in treasuries, get a yield, and pocket the yield, which is why Tether's got $26 billion in profit, has made more money in profits than Citibank or BlackRock this year. So it's a kingmaker for the issuers. You, the end user, get a stable coin. Oh, and by the way, Uncle Sam gets more buyers for its U.S. treasuries because the U.S. treasury is what's pegged on the stable coin. So it's a win-win for big tech, fintech, for JP Morgan. It's a massive win for the Uncle Sam because you stablecoin suckers are buying these stablecoins to go spend, but you're really helping finance Uncle Sam. Fine. I mean, I think Tether is the 18th largest lender now to the U.S. government with these U.S. treasuries. So it's in the U.S. interest to expand the stablecoin market using this DLT technology. But all it is just creating another sponge for unloved U.S. dollars and U.S. treasuries internal under the guide of a stable coin. And, again, that's the mathematics behind it. What the darker side behind the stable coin is, look, in addition to making Tether very wealthy and giving, the Uncle Sam a lot of money, this is still a crypto in the sense it's programmable, trackable, and seizable. It's not issued by a central bank. It's issued by a commercial bank or a fintech company. And if you actually think that isn't the same thing as a central bank digital currency, you have to understand how commercial banks and fintech are tied to the hip of government and the Fed. It's the same thing. It's still trackable. It's still seizable. You can still be that Canadian truck driver and not have your dollar when you need it if you join the wrong group, say the wrong thing, or don't take the right jab 10 years from now. This is setting up perfect control for a major population. And I think that the easiest example I give anyone who has a debit card, who's traveled, any American listening would know this. You have a debit card, you land in Paris, you go to get a Big Mac, and your card is rejected because your credit card company saw that, well, you were in New York this morning, now you're in Paris. We think there's a security threat. You can't use your debit card now. You have to go through a bunch of hoops, call, give your mother-in-law's maiden name, whatever, and they still may not give you your card back. In other words, you feel like it's your money, You have it, it's there, but you can't use the card to buy anything. That's a very helpless feeling. I think all of us have felt it sometime in our lives, where what's in your wallet you can't use. Okay, you can solve it pretty quickly. Imagine what happens if that happens and you can't do anything about it. Your e-dollars are frozen. Somehow your social credit score did something, or somehow you were traveling where you weren't supposed to be, or you thought you could be, and you can't use it. That may sound hard to imagine, but it's exactly what these stable coins are setting us up for. In addition to paying Uncle Sam a lot of money and making fintech guys even richer, you're getting nothing but more control and no yield. So that's stable coin in a nutshell, Farzan. And I'm simplifying because it's appalling. And yet it's just frog blowing us right into more centralization, which always happens when you're debt broke like America is.
That is exactly right, Matthew. And the other thing was, I always used to say, why CBDC was a solution looking for a problem. They already had the solution ready. And if you just remove the C from the CBDC, we already had bank digital currency. And stablecoin is exactly that now. It's BDC. And as you mentioned, the truckers in there, we didn't have to use CBDC for them to block their accounts. It's just a bank account. So they can call JP Morgan and say, hey, freeze all these accounts. And that is it. Matthew and Farzan said this thing, we don't want them to use the money. Or I think in the UK, they've now said, I think people are going to be allowed only so many flights a year. I think Europe's going, sorry for my language, batshit crazy on all of these.
Yeah. No, there's wealth registries now. You have to show your wealth. You have to show if you have boats, or you have this kind of, it gets categorizing citizens now into the haves and have-nots, which again, there's massive wealth inequality in Europe. It's nothing like what I see in the US. And whether you're wealthy or not wealthy, that should be insulting to you as a citizen. I understand the hang the rich mentality. I understand the sentiment, the frustration of the wealth inequality, especially in the US, especially as a guy from the lower middle class who has polo pictures behind him. I totally get it. And I'll tell you, one of the things that's really frustrating is when I'm in Switzerland, in Zurich. It's a very wealthy town with very wealthy citizens, but the wealthiest cars, the Bentleys, the Ferraris, the Porsches, they have Ukrainian license plates. Why? Because there was so many bad, corrupt deals made of so many corrupt. Everyone knew before the war the most corrupt country in Europe was Ukraine. The whole Zelensky crowd have made such a personal fortune. They're coming to Switzerland to hide with their stolen money that U.S. taxpayers paid for. I literally see that with my own eyes. So there's so much frustration, and I can understand people saying, freeze the assets of these people, but they're freezing all our assets at some point. They're setting this up. This may sound extreme. Not that every dime you or I have is going to be frozen, but the fact that they can is terrifying. Egon von Greyerz and I are not doing anything that we are afraid of that's illegal. We have nothing to hide, but we like the freedom to know that our money is protected outside of that system, which is why we've been arguing for physical gold for decades. It's not that we are afraid or we have something to hide ourselves. We just don't want anybody else telling us what to do or seizing our assets. And that's what the Stablecoin Genius Act just crept in. It is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And all we're hearing is the buzz, the technology, the speed, the efficiency. We're not seeing the darker side, and we're not seeing who's profiting and who's losing. But that's nothing new in American or global politics or financial markets. It's always the whales masquerading as support when they're just sucking the plankton of the middle class right down their gills. This is just business as usual for banking, politics, and currency.
They're too big to fail and too big to jail, as they say. And I tell my listeners, when obviously the common sense is banking also is misunderstood because people think, it's, as you just said, can't use your own money. But the terms and conditions, when you deposit money in the bank, it ain't your money anymore. You've lent it to the bank. That's why you get a yield on it. As the minute it's in the bank, you're getting a yield on it, and there's a risk factor. And that is why gold held privately in a vault, or whether you go midnight gardening below your house or whatever, is the only asset that is nobody else's liability, and you're not trying to earn a yield on it. Yes, it costs you a little bit to store the gold or the silver, but you sleep better at night. That's what you just sleep better at night.
That's our business model, Farzan.
Yeah, I know, and that's why I wanted to bring you on the show as well, because the simple thing is, as I've told my listeners, the times we're going into isn't about getting rich quick. It's about who's going to lose the least. That's how you're going to get wealthy. And one thing you mentioned in there in Australia, well, not so much in New Zealand yet, but they're talking about an unrealized capital gains. I know it came up under Kamala Harris in the US as well. they're coming up with stupid policies just for the sake of it. How do you unrealized capital gains? And then when you lose the value on it, are they going to refund it to you? I don't think so. How are normal people accepting this? Are they just all brainwashed, or they just can't do nothing till the real revolution begins? Your views?
I think that's a great question. I think the plumbing is so intentionally complex, and so the plumbing behind so many of these mechanizations, you have to sit and really think about it. And so A, it's complex. And B, they kind of frog boil you into it slowly so you don't see yourself getting frog boiled. So the complexity, the frog boil, and then I think the other thing is just the dishonesty, the lies, the lipstick on a pig. This is for efficiency. The Fed was created under a bill called banking reform. That's how they called the birth of the Fed. They come up with clever words to hide really bad policies. And so these kind of tricks, including tax tricks, either you're too impotent to fix, it's too complex to understand, or it's happening so slow you don't see it until it happens all at once, and you realize anything can be taken, you don't have control, you have no autonomy, you have no escape, and then you just hope the government takes care of you, and you bow to them and hope they're fair and good and decent to you. That's up to each person to think. Some people do trust their governments, and I'm not here to change that view. That's up to them. I don't want to be condescending, but and I'm not saying that everything's going to go to hell, but from the simple to the complex, as countries get broke, they get more desperate, more centralization kicks in, less freedoms come. That is throughout history the same. Even something as simple in Europe, which I've seen in the last 3 years, is the ubiquity, the number of radars on the side of the road to give you a ticket, whether you're driving to get groceries or whether you're driving across the country. It's like a minefield. It is not for security. It is a revenue they are taking from the people. And this goes back to Adam Smith and John Adams. He says, look, the countries borrow from each other. When that doesn't work, they borrow from banks. When that doesn't work, they go to war. And when that doesn't work, they just steal from the people. And that's kind of where we're at now. We're stealing from the people in the names of these different policies, tax policies, road security policies, crypto policies. It's just taking from you. And eventually with stable coins and other kind of scary side of the digitalization of the world is they'll just click, and your card, so to speak, like at that airport, is no longer accessible, and then you are frozen. You have been punished for thinking too differently than the rest of us, or spending too differently. If you're trafficking children, arms, nuclear weapons, and drugs, freeze them all day long. And the problem is that's the story. That's the nice side. I'm not in favor of supporting those people. Freeze their assets, end that war on drugs. I'd love to see that. But the real problem isn't. That's only half the story. The more dark side is when you're just someone who thinks differently, or when you're just someone who wants to critique the government or pose a hard question to the government. When you become a threat to that, then you're frozen. And America has this wonderful story about how all these brave men got together in Philadelphia and in Boston and rejected the illegal taxation and without representation of the Mad King George. And we envisioned this idea of a free democracy and a real government and a gold and silverback currency and independence from tyranny. Okay, wonderful story. And most of it's true. But if those same people were alive today in 2025 and the Mad King George was still here in 2025 with stablecoin, it'd be very hard to get George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams in a room to make any decisions for the good of the people. This is the real threat that no one wants to talk about. And that's why it concerns me. AI, stablecoin, this whole modernization, feel-good narrative has a lot of darkness behind it.
If we run a business like governments run the country, we'd probably go to jail. It's a Ponzi scheme, right? But if they do it with endless deficits, inflationary policies, it's okay. It's actual policy according to them. And that brings us back to the start of the conversation. We're not taught about inflation. Inflation is baked in the cake. With every dollar that's created, you've got to pay interest on it. Where does the money come from? They've got to create more money, which means the entire system is based on inflation. And that is why the founding fathers had gold and silver. In fact, I think I'd done some research a couple of years back when I was getting interviewed just to see the New Zealand dollar. When did that come into effect? Because the central bank, again, people don't understand, central banks create the notes. And the other credit is created by the banks, by mouse click money again, right? And I'd done some research back then. And after the Federal Reserve was created, again, if you put a conspiracy hat or tinfoil hat to do with the Titanic, and I'm obviously going to be interviewing Mr. Edward Griffin, who wrote the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, next week. So we'll go into that a bit more. But even in New Zealand, believe it or not, and it's clearly on Wikipedia, the New Zealand government confiscated citizens' gold. They had to hand it into the central bank, and they were issued Reserve Bank of New Zealand notes. It's just a note, a piece of paper, confidence, fiat currency in the government that keeps it going around in circles. And I've explained it too many times to people. It's just a piece of paper with number 50 on it or 100 on it. And it has nothing more to it. The day, like Zimbabwe, people lose faith in the government, that becomes useless. And that is when gold is what will hold through centuries and stuff like that. Do you want to talk about just what you guys do at Gold Switzerland and why, obviously?
Well, precisely, we address the very things you're worried about, Farzan. I mean, look, we're all former bankers, almost all the partners, with the exception of a couple. And, we all understand banking risk because we've been in banks and because we've studied banking like you. We see the currency risk. And we've known this for decades. And we see, again, not tinfoil hat at the end of the world, but banking risk, debt risk, currency risk, geopolitical risk. This is what we were based on. We wanted money, hard money, outside of that system, outside of that banking system, with no counterparty risk, to your point, and that cannot be created with a mouse click. That cannot be, an asset that is real money that can't be debased, and it can't be hypothecated by a bank or frozen by a bank, which means gold and silver in a private vault outside of the banking system. That's our business model. And we have clients from over 90 countries. We run a great deal of assets. Our AUM minimum is very high. So we only really appeal to institutional high net worth family offices or high net worth individual investors because that's all we can serve. But our message about gold outside of the banking system is good for anyone, whether you can afford an ounce or a gram or a kilo bar. The message is real money, real protection, real wealth preservation, and real wealth itself cannot be measured in fiat money that is a melting ice cube. It has to be saved in physical precious metals, which is, by the way, what central banks are finally doing now. They're saving in precious metals and spending in fiat. So it's a very simple model. There's a lot of complexity in how good our security is, our communication, our privacy, all that. But the model is exactly what you said. No counterparty risk outside of the banking system, in your name, physical asset, access audited whenever, segregated, allocated, yours only, not levered, not hypothecated. That's it. Yes, it's held in a hole in the ground. That is the counterparty risk. So we have to have a good hole in the ground, no debt, total security, and 100% access. So that is how we've built this model that Egon started with his own money decades ago in a small circle of people, and now it's grown into a major international business. I think we lead in the private precious metal space for high net worth investors in gold servicing. And it's no coincidence that the things Egon saw decades ago when he was critiqued, like James Turk, for being too negative, well, in the meantime, his gold price he bought at 300 is now at 35, but more importantly, he's still saving in gold. He's avoided all this risk. He sleeps better at night. It's that simple, that boring, and that smart. And so, sometimes simple and smart and boring are all in the same thing. A Chanel dress is still a Chanel dress. A glass of water when you're thirsty is simple. And I always say in France, a baguette is still just really good when you're hungry. And this is a very simple, elegant way to deal with a very complex, noisy, broken financial system and a currency system on its knees. And that's our model. And we're at goldswitzerland.com. or vongreyerz.gold or vg.gold. And all of these thoughts and interviews and white papers can be found there.
Yeah, because you're right. You guys also write quite a few good articles and do interviews. And obviously, as you said, high net worth, because I believe yours is the most secure vault in the world. It's nuclear proof, earthquake proof, all of that. But you do offer some clients in Singapore as well, I think now, and other jurisdictions as well. So obviously, but again, your messaging. Spend in dollars or whatever your currency is and save in gold, because we know the system's coming to its natural end. Doesn't matter how they kick the table over, kicking is coming. So better prepare and save yourself from what's coming. Hey, Matthew, just towards the end of this, I'll do a kind of a quick fire round. I know how you might answer some of these, but I'm just going to go. Yes, well, pick one, and one for which reason. I'll decide which one I want to pick for you. Bitcoin or gold?
Gold.
We know why.
And then why? Well, gold for...
Yeah, no,
well,
go on.
It's a better store of value.
Better store of value because...
Better store of value.
Because, yeah, nothing against Bitcoin as well for me as I speak to my guests. Philosophically speaking, I like the concept. Yes, it's easy. You can travel between countries. And I was talking to a guest just yesterday, and we were talking about in Australia, I know a person who was just carrying a USB stick. We just have Word documents on it. And they stopped him in customs thinking he might be carrying some Bitcoin. So the world is getting a bit dicey, but yeah, I think stablecoin was created, stablecoin or CBDCs were, your Bitcoin was also created to get people used to certain things. It's a blockchain. The government can see exactly what you've done on that block or on that chain, and it can be stopped. Whereas again, so we know your answer, Bitcoin or gold. Anything you want to add on the Bitcoin piece at all?
No, again, like as a speculation asset, it's fantastic. It certainly has a higher annualized return than any asset class in the history of anything. It's incredible. That's both good and bad. I'm not mocking Bitcoin. Its standard deviation, its volatility, and its correlation to the NASDAQ are still a problem for me as a store of value. Its ISO compliant blockchain technology and all that is fantastic. Its portability and all that is fantastic. And certainly the returns it's made for certain investors is fantastic. I'm not anti-crypto or anti-Bitcoin to be pro-gold, but as a store of value investor, I can't put crypto in the same camp at all as physical gold. As a speculation asset, I can't think of anything more interesting. Let's put it that way.
And some people say, oh, the government might confiscate it or take it off. Yeah. Even if that's not the case, the risk where I see with Bitcoin is with this war coming up, if there's an EMP attack, which Russia has the possibility of doing, if there's no internet, if there's no electricity, you can't use it. Whereas gold, you can still take your coin or silver, as people in Venezuela and Brazil do. You can still buy groceries with a gram of gold or silver. Where would you invest your money? Commodities or the actual mining shares?
Depends on what my goals were. If I was really looking to go out on the risk branch for better speculation, better juice, I'd go into the equities. There are, if you know how to pick the right mines, I think that's a generational wealth opportunity. If you can stomach the risk and you know how to do the due diligence. If you're going to go right for the metals, whether it's copper, zinc, nickel, or gold or silver, whatever, any hard asset, you've got to have a much longer term view and holding period and conviction, and probably a more conservative bake. So it really depends on what type of investor you are, what kind of speculator you are, what kind of wealth you're looking for. The equities in the mining space for the few are going to do extremely well, and that's going to be generational wealth for the ones who pick those.
Your views on AI, good or bad?
Terrifying, because AI to me is just like another meme. It's only as good output as its input. It's definitely mega computing. It's incredibly faster. Absolutely. Compared to Google, a ChatGPT is extraordinary. So AI process is much faster, but it's not wiser. It won't have to explain itself for one thing. Well, ChatGPT said so. That's it. And I think it's incredibly deflationary. I think the idea of a Starbucks with 2 people and 100 robots is dystopian, not modernization. I think what it does to labor force is appalling. I think what it does to the IQ of the average already celebrity mad population of idiots is debilitating, because you won't have to think for yourself. You'll just report or repeat what you've been told. The ability to do critical thinking, critical examination, critical reading, underlining, etc., will just disappear, and you'll just go into ChatGPT or AI mode. You can even put a chip in your brain and learn Chinese. That's not the same as living in China. So that's, to me, it's horrifying. I also don't think it's fair valued at this point. I mean, DeepSeek versus Sam Altman, these are things you can spend a lot of time on. I think there's nothing we can do about it. It's coming. I think it's not wise. It's just faster. It won't have to explain itself. It will take over more and more jobs. It will be deflationary. And I think when you look at the example of like diagnostic robotics or the DARPA director when they used AI for IEDs and war and diagnostic robotics during COVID, their actual results were no better than a coin toss. So I'm not even sure they're effective. They're just faster. But that doesn't mean there won't be a lot of money made in AI stocks, like there wasn't a lot of money made in .com stocks, electricity stocks, train stocks, or car stocks in prior bubbles, which I've studied or traded. So this is just another new meme. It's very important. AI is a turning point. It is not a saving grace.
Yeah, there's something you brought up there. Sorry, I'm just going off topic, but you said something about obviously AI. It's kind of, how do we put it? Not inflationary, but deflationary in a way. And I heard this point of view the other day where they said the demographics are changing in certain countries, and countries like South Korea and Japan, which has low fertility rates, traditionally used to be seen as a problem because of the fertility problem, because of the tax structure. You need newer generation coming in to pay taxes for the older generation. And the viewpoint was flipped that maybe because of AI and maybe because of COVID and the people dying and the fertility, maybe there'll be less chaos or civil wars in countries where there is fewer people. Because in a country like India, maybe if artificial intelligence comes in and a lot of people are jobless, maybe we have a problem. Maybe we have revolutions. Maybe people rise up over governments. That was quite a contradictory view, which I heard the other day.
It's interesting. It's interesting. And again, it's not for me to determine which is right or wrong. These are things we have to think about. And each of us have to determine, is government, is tech, is markets, are all these policies generally with the altruistic aim of helping as many citizens as possible and doing the right thing? I'm sure there are some politicians who mean absolutely the best, but in general, if you start from a premise where that may be something you don't believe, then you got to look at all these trends with a more skeptical eye. And that's not for me to tell you how to look. I'm clearly more skeptical. I have that bias. My study of history and the study of these recent arrangements, especially when you get towards the end of a credit cycle, which is where the world is right now, my bias is this is actually a very bad time to be trusting what's said and done, whether it's tech, whether it's trade, whether it's banking, or whether it's currency practices. To me, as we get towards the end of a credit cycle, most of what you hear is the opposite of what it really is, including the Genius Act, as we talked about.
They say, do you know when a politician's lying? When he opens his mouth.
Yeah, exactly. It's part of his job. Yeah, I was going to say, it's pretty much all the time.
They attract psychopaths and pathological liars, they say, politics, right? So just one last question for you. So if you had to pick between cash and stable coins, which one would you pick?
Probably, I mean, it's a great question. And the only reason I'd pick cash is, at least, even though I know it's losing its value, I'm staring at it, at least it's in my own possession and can't be shut down unless someone literally takes it out of my hand. I think stablecoin is a heck of a lot more efficient, but the fact that it's trackable and seizable, I'd rather just have cash.
Fair enough. The reason I asked that because it was, again, if you might know, in India, there was demonetization. The Prime Minister can come on the news one day and just say, hey, we're canceling all these denomination notes, and it's happened before. So I want someone like you to just have an input. Okay, we're going to end this, and now there's some fun questions coming just to get to know Matthew a little bit more. The best advice that you have received from someone, Matthew?
Never abandon your own judgment. Just make sure it's informed judgment. It's one thing to have an opinion, but make it informed. Then you should defend it. But that's what JFK said. There's something immoral about abandoning your own judgment. What I see too much is emotional arguments, emotional judgment, but no informed judgment. And if you want to be independent in this world, it has nothing to do with money, it has to do with your thinking. And if your thinking is informed and you've done the work, then that gives you certain freedom that nothing else can give.
All right. And is there a favorite funny story you like telling your mates, or a beer or wine?
About myself or about
anyone? It's a funny story you like sharing with your friends or family members, or...
Oh my gosh! I mean, they're not stories I want to tell anyone in the internet. I've done some pretty stupid things. Oh gosh, that's a great question. I wish I'd kind of known that. I would come up with a G version. I mean, I think one of the funniest stories was when I was learning to ride horses, and I was bragging to my friends how good I was, and this was like when I was a teenager, and we're all full of arrogance and ego. God knows I am. And I had invited a bunch of guys to come watch me ride, and I was basically there to show off. And they were all there, and there was me running around in circles and doing all these fancy things. And then within 36 seconds, I just got tossed and was knocked unconscious. It was the perfect moment of pride come before the fall, a really humbling moment of hubris. And I think that was a funny story. But yeah, that's about the safest one I can tell out loud. What's really funny too is when I'm in Zurich and I see all these really sketchy, corrupt people driving around in Bentleys. I find that really funny almost. We're we're seeing these rats leaving the ship, making a lot of money. That's tragic funny, but it's not really funny. But it always makes me just shake my head when I see a lot of that right now.
Thanks for sharing that. Hopefully we'll catch up for a beer at some stage in the future, and then you can tell me the other funny stories you don't want to tell the audience. Just one last one, Mike. I run a financial consultancy called Success Simplified. So I always ask people, how does Matthew define success?
Not with dollars and gold or silver, that's for sure. I know that's not the right answer for a financial program. I take money very seriously. I take the freedom that money gives me very seriously. But the more I study history and people, and the more I study philosophy, and the more I've had the shiny new car smell and the frickin' polo games and the good things that money can buy and the freedom, and I don't apologize for it. I think it's wonderful. But the longer I spend on this earth, this is something Egan and I absolutely agree on. All those things are great. And it's certainly hard, as Frank Sinatra said, it's harder to be poor than rich when you're struggling. And the stress it creates on you when you don't have money for mortgages, tuition, taking care of your family, that's devastating. But once you reach a certain point, you don't need to be millions or billions in where you can take care of basic needs. I think the most important thing for me is the thing that you'll think on your last breath will be the few friendships you've had. You're lucky if you have one or two really good friends. You're lucky if your wife still talks to you and your kids still respect you. And you're very, very rich if you can accomplish that. That's what I'll remember. It will never be anything that I can measure in gold, silver, money, real estate, all that other nonsense. And I'm not trying to be smug. I'm not trying to say it's not important to be ambitious or to try and be free from financial stress, because that is very high stress. I come from that as a child in a high stress, financially difficult family. That is debilitating. But you don't need billions or millions to be extremely rich once you can take care of the basics. And anyone can protect themselves with a little bit of silver and gold and a little common sense and spending, unlike your government, within your means. And that's my takeaway.
Thanks for sharing that. Anything I might have missed that you would like to share with our audience at all, Matthew?
Again, we could talk for hours, and we're always going to miss something. But you certainly hit a lot of important things. Things.
I appreciate your time. I'll put the links to the website for people to reach out as well, and hopefully we can do this maybe in the next couple of months, 3 months time. Thanks for your time, Matthew.
My pleasure. Thank you, Father.